So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Looks like our number of attendees have sort of leveled off. It looks like a really good mix. We've got some undergrad, grad, exchange, visiting students joining us today. So welcome everybody. Looks like most people have never lived in Canada before. So there's going to be a significant transition for you, moving to new country, new culture. And it looks like some of you, this is your first webinar, so welcome. And for those of you who have attended our other webinars before, welcome back. So today's session is all about helping you sort of navigate searching for off-campus housing. And we've got a few guests joining us today. So myself, my name is Andrew Staples, and I am the Student Success Coach within International Student Services. And I'd just like to ask Andrea to join just to do a brief introduction.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks for that comprehensive poll. Welcome to all incoming students. My name is Andrea Jemfe, and I'm a coordinator within the International Student Services.
Great, thank you. And Wendy?
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Wendy. I'm a fourth-year student studying honors communication and minoring in economics at McMaster University. I'm a program support assistant at International Student Services. I'm a student staff, and I work closely with Andrew, helping him with summer webinars in healthcare, UHIP, housing, and academic transition to university.
Great, thank you, Andrea and Wendy. So today's session, just sort of some housekeeping items. We do encourage you to ask questions. So we do have a Q&A section that's available. I would recommend maybe hold off for your questions until closer to the end of the webinar, because chances are we might be answering your questions along the way. You do have the ability to upvote your favorite questions, and that will help us prioritize which questions we would like or you will be able to answer. So this webinar is part of what we would call our summer webinar series, and so it's hosted by International Student Services, and so our office is here to support you really from now as you start thinking of arriving all the way throughout the duration of your time with McMaster. And so some of the activities that we do, we have different workshops, socials. There's going to be an airport welcome, for those who are joining in August. We also have immigration advising. We've got one-on-one appointments that we can help you with. And again, sort of our first interaction with you is going to be through these summer webinars. And so we would like to begin this webinar, just like, many sort of meetings that happen at McMaster, with what we call a land acknowledgement. And so at McMaster University, we recognize that we're guests on the territory where we are currently living, studying, and working, and where you are going to be joining us shortly. And so if you're not familiar with it, a land acknowledgement is an act of reconciliation that involves giving a statement at the start of an event or meeting to recognize the Indigenous peoples who inhabited the land currently and who are here before us. And so by acknowledging is one way that we can help show respect to the Indigenous people and their enduring connection with the traditional territory, as well as their history here. So McMaster University itself is located on the lands of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee Nations, and it's protected by what's called the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. And so in this wampum agreement, the dish represents the shared land where we all live, study, and work, while the one spoon represents this idea of sharing. So using the spoon to take what you need and then passing the dish on to those that you share the land with. So to get started today, I wanted to just review a few terms, just recognizing that, for some of you, this might be the first time looking for housing, and you might encounter some terms that you aren't familiar with. So the first term that we wanted to talk about is rent, probably the most common term. So this would refer to the, the regular payments that you're making towards the place that you are living in. Utilities. This is a term that would refer to electricity, water, waste disposal, heating, and sewage. So in your search, you might see some postings that have utilities included, or you might, which means that the price of all of those that I just listed would be included in the rent. Some would say utilities extra, in which case you would be responsible for paying, the electricity bill, water bill, and those kind of things. Some apartments that you're searching for would be furnished, which means that there might be a desk and a bed. Others would be unfurnished, which means that there wouldn't be anything there. Most places are going to include sort of the essentials like a stove, oven, fridge, maybe a microwave. So regardless if it's unfurnished or furnished, sort of those kitchen essentials would be there. But that's just, recognizing that, coming to a new country, you can't fit a bed or a desk in your suitcase, nor would you want to. So just recognizing that the furnished, unfurnished is something to be aware of. A co-ed apartment is some place where there is more than one gender living in the same accommodation. And a sublet, this is where you are not necessarily signing the lease with the landlord, but another tenant or another renter has already signed that lease, cannot stay there, and then you are sort of taking over that lease from the previous renter. So a lease, this is sort of the legal contract that would be between you as the renter and the landlord or the rental company. And so this is a legal document that you really need to pay special attention to. There is a standard lease, which is called the Ontario Standard Lease, that landlords are supposed to use. And inside this document, it's going to talk about obviously the rent price, the duration of the rental agreement, if there's any deposits that are required. It's going to talk about sort of your legal rights as a tenant, as well as what the responsibilities are of a landlord. And so it is really important to recognize that a lease is something that's legally binding. And so if you sign a lease for 12 months and then you find another house next week and you'd rather live there and you sign another lease, then you're legally responsible to be paying the rent for both of those leases. So do really encourage you to take this lease quite seriously, because it is a legally binding document. And then the other thing to be aware of is some individuals choose to purchase insurance. So insurance as a renter would be something to ensure that your property, so your belongings, would be covered. And so that would be, in an unforeseen circumstance, such as a fire or a flood or something like that. So just something to think about, that some individuals do choose to purchase insurance. So this webinar, we're going to be talking about a few sort of different categories. So the first is about who you want to live with. So selecting your roommates. We're going to talk about the different types of housing that is available in Hamilton, a little bit about budget, what to expect, the different locations around campus that are quite popular with students. And then we've just sort of got some other general tips available later on in the presentation. So I'd like to invite Wendy to sort of share her story about moving to Canada for the first time.
Thanks, Andrew. So I want to share with you my story and some of the obstacles I faced when I first moved away from my home country, which is South Korea, for the first time. I started to live by myself for the first time when I was 22 years old. I moved to Hamilton to attend McMaster University. I was not familiar with this area at all. I had no friends, relatives, or family here, so I felt lonely in the first year. I did not have a community that I belonged to, and I really wanted to belong to somewhere. So I found out that when you first move to a place when you're not familiar with, it is very important that you put yourself out there and reach out to people to build your own circle where you belong to. I now have a community in the church, friends at the university, and our international student services team at McMaster University. Secondly, know how to cook before you come here. I did not know how to cook at all, so I ate a lot of takeouts and junk food because it was cheap, delicious, and convenient. However, I noticed that I was gaining a lot of weight, always felt tired with low energy because I was eating high calories with no nutrition. Also, I was spending a lot of money on the food. So I searched how to cook healthy foods to keep me energized for the whole day by watching cooking videos on YouTube. And when I first came to Hamilton, I had no knowledge of what foods are healthy, unhealthy, what is high and low in carbs, proteins, or fat. However, now I can cook almost every food in no time. Thirdly, know how to do your own laundry. I did not know how to do my own laundry. My parents never taught me how to do my own laundry. So I would just dump all the clothes into the washing machine and did not know where to put the detergent and softener. Lastly, benefit of living by yourself would be that you do not have to share kitchen or bathroom with other people. You can do whatever you want. However, it can get a little bit lonely. Benefit of living with roommates would be that you always have someone you can talk to. The bad side would be that you have to share the common areas and might have some trouble because everybody has a different living style. So depending on who you are and your living style, you can choose whether to live by yourself or live with roommates. Sorry, next is mine as well. Okay, so who do you want to live with? So if you decide to live with roommates, there are a few important things to check. First, the sleeping time. Are you a morning person? If you are a morning person, you want to live with a roommate who wake up early in the morning and sleep early at night. However, if you are a night person, you'd likely want to live with a roommate who also sleep at night and wake up in the afternoon. Second, cleanness. Are you a clean person? If yes, you'd want to live with clean roommates who clean the common areas regularly and wash dishes right away in the sink. Are you a messy person? If yes, you'd want to live with roommates who do not really care and someone who is okay with stacking dishes in the sink and wash them after like 5 days after. Third, cooking. Do you want to live with a roommate who cooks a lot in the kitchen or someone who rarely cooks and always order takeouts? Fourth, noise level. Are you a person who likes to party and always bring guests over to your house? Then you'd want to live with roommates who are okay with being loud. Are you a person who likes to be in a quiet place and wants to concentrate in your study? Then you want roommates who also likes their personal space. Fifth, alcohol and smoking. Do you drink alcohol or smoke cigarettes and cannabis? Then you'd live with people who are okay with doing that. But if you do not drink alcohol or smoke, it would be best to live in a substance-free house.
Thank you, Wendy, and appreciate you sharing your lived experience with us all today. So in a conversation with what Wendy noted, home is really supposed to be refuge and a place of safety. And we understand that it could be difficult for folks to find other like-minded or folks who hold similar values or perhaps interests and really build a space for yourself. And so one intervention or one platform that the university has invested in is McMatch, which is essentially a pairing system which helps you seek other roommates or future living folks with similar interests and values as you. So how it works is you build a profile, which is public to folks who are interacting with the platform, and you answer a series of questions just related to your living style and your experience. And that way you can match and look for other folks who have similar profiles as you. So this is a great way to kind of build community, but also optimize your housing search with folks as sometimes groups have better opportunities to find and secure housing. And I believe Andrew has included a link in the chat to follow up with. So now looking at the types of housing that you may encounter during your housing search, and it's important to set the foundation that a lot of the surrounding area around the main campus is residential, meaning that largely these are residential homes or family homes. And that's because historically families have lived around the surrounding area of main campus. And over time, with more foot traffic of students coming in, landlords have actually privatized or optimized some of the surrounding housing to carve out additional rooms into what was traditionally family or familial homes. So with that being said, some of the structure or some of the housing can be upwards to 100 years old surrounding the McMaster main campus, but that's not to say that they're not well kept or they're not renovated or modern on the inside, but just that these structures can be upwards to 100 years old. So what you'll find commonly is a student home surrounding the area. And this is, most likely something that you'll see in a lot of classifieds and listings around McMaster. And this can house upwards to 4 or to 8 folks within the home. You'll often have a private bedroom, and furnished is an option. However, that tends to be a bit more expensive. Furnished meaning that furniture and perhaps decor comes with the space. And you'll often have a partially furnished living area. So maybe a couch, perhaps a television or a coffee table, as well as a kitchen, which is supported with some appliances. You'll most likely have a shared bathroom and kitchen, and Wendy will speak to some considerations around your housing search with this piece. And this often tends to be the least expensive housing type that you'll find, as they are older properties. But generally speaking, you'll look for or you'll see an 8 to 12-month lease that is associated with this type of housing. So breaking down the student house, as I mentioned earlier, landlords really have carved out this space to optimize or rather maximize the amount of rooms that can exist within one home. So with that being said, you may find a different room types within this student house. So the best way to identify it through a classified or a housing post is through these visual identifiers or reminders of what it may mean in terms of what type of room it is. So typically a basement apartment tends to range from $400 to $500 per month. And you'll be able to identify this kind of room by a narrow or almost a sliver of a window. That's because this room is actually underground and it's slightly risen above ground in order to make space for a window. And the second picture that we have on this slide is often found on an upper or a lower level space within a home. So this could either be on the first floor or the second floor. And this notes that it's between a range of $500 to $700. And you can often tell through a posting just by a reasonable amount of window taken up by the wall. Last, we have the attic, which can range between $500 and $700. And this is best identified by a slanted roof because it does take place at the very highest level or at the top floor of a home. And with that being said, it's best to note from a climate perspective that, houses that have multi-level floors, especially a basement, tends to lean on the cooler end in terms of temperature, and the attic tends to lean on the more warmer end in terms of temperature. And this is extremely important, as in Canada, we do have an extreme range of different weather conditions, and so depending on where you're placed in the home, may impact your transition and your settlement, depending on which areas of the world that you're coming from. Next, the housing type is a private student apartment. So this is really sought after by students because it helps to recreate the on-campus or the residence experience that we have at McMaster. So often you'll find that you'll have a double or single occupancy, sometimes upwards to 5 people living in a space. However, you will have a private bedroom, slightly furnished with bedding, as well as a furnished living room and kitchen area. There is an opportunity to have a roommate matching system. So often folks who know that they're interested in a private student apartment and are traveling with friends or family can note that they want to be placed with that particular person. Often these hold a 12-month lease and includes utilities, and this tends to sit on a more costly end of the spectrum because it is move-in friendly, and also it mimics the experience of on-campus residence, which means you tend to have more amenities or more special consideration rooms as a student, such as study rooms, maybe a gym, maybe like a dance studio that exists just to encourage community as well as activity within the building. It is important to note that these spaces do have a bit of a waiting list because they are often really sought after, but that's not to say that you can't take place in this type of housing somewhere during your undergraduate journey or graduate journey. Another housing type commonly found in the downtown core area and slightly surrounding main campus is apartment or high-rise apartments. So this can take place or hold a single or double occupancy. However, you will have a private bedroom and you will share a bathroom most likely. This is important to note that most apartments will have you sign a 12-month lease. Last, you may have a bedroom within a landlord. So this is important to note because sometimes folks may have a guest room or an extra space within their home that they utilize for students or for visiting guests to take place. So with that being said, you may be living with the landlord themselves. Perhaps they live above ground and you live in the basement or vice versa, or you may be living with a family. With this being said, you do have a private bedroom and it's most likely fully furnished, and you will have a furnished living area or kitchen to support you. And also you may have to share a bathroom, perhaps with others within the home. This tends to be a bit more expensive, again, because it is move-in friendly, and you do get a bit more of a range in terms of in terms of lease. So you can have a range between 4 or 12 months. And now I'll turn it over to Wendy to speak to her student housing experience.
Thanks, Andrea. So I would like to share my experience. So I have lived in many different types of housing during my time at McMaster University. I moved 4 times in total. In my first year, I lived on campus at Bates residence. In my second year, I moved to the student apartment style called West Village Suites. It was a 4-bedroom apartment. In my third year, I lived in a student housing right in front of the McMaster University with 5 other girls. And currently I'm living in the Westdale area, and it is a co-ed house, and there are 6 people in total. So based on my experience, West Village Suites was very new. Room was clean and spacious, and it had a very high speed internet, but the rooms are unfurnished, so if you have to buy all the furnitures. When I lived in front of the McMaster University, I was never late to the class, but I could come home between breaks in the class, and that was very handy. And living near Westdale area is very nice because there are many coffee shops and restaurants in there. So I have experienced living in different types of campus housing, and I would like to share with you some tips when looking for student housing in Hamilton. First of all, attic is usually hotter during the summer and colder during the winter than the rest of the houses. For the houses below the top floor, you can hear the upstairs neighbors' footsteps. The floor is made of woods and usually very thin in the houses in the Hamilton. In my second year, I got a student housing near the Starbucks and Shoppers Drug Mart in the main street. It was a co-ed house and my room was a basement room. I had a very loud walking upstairs neighbors, and I could hear every single step that he walked on, and it extremely bothered me. However, it might not bother other people. I know a friend who is totally fine with living in the basement room, and the footsteps upstairs do not bother them at all. It really depends on what type of person you are, whether you're sensitive to noises or whether you're insensitive to noises. And I will also check how many people you're sharing the bathroom and kitchen. If you share kitchen and bathroom with too many people, it can get a little bit messy. The ideal number for sharing bathroom would be 3 people, and the ideal number for sharing the kitchen would be 4 people. Find a room farther away from the kitchen. Kitchen is usually where everybody gathers and cook foods. So it tends to be the loudest place in the house and smells like food most of the time. So if you want to be in a quiet, smell-free space, I would recommend to get a room farthest away from the kitchen. And I think Andrew's speaking next. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Wendy. It's great to have that insight based on your experience. So in terms of prices, the range really varies. It's quite competitive right now, not just in Hamilton, but everywhere in Canada, finding house. And so, but based on what you can see on the screen, the rent really varies. Now, in terms of utility costs, just remember that if you're living alone, utility costs, even internet, things like that, you would be paying for yourself. But if you're in a house with 6 or 7 other people, those costs are going to be split amongst everybody. So that's another thing to consider when we're looking at sort of your budget. And so if we break down, another important thing is some places might ask for a key deposit as well. And so it might be $100, might be $150. And so this is usually something that would be, it might be included in the lease and asked for upfront. And so again, it's a deposit. If you lose your key, then you probably lose your deposit. But if you keep your key, and then when you return it, you get the deposit back. So in terms of other kind of living expenses, obviously rent is important, but above and beyond rent, that there are going to be other living expenses you should factor in. So eating out in Canada can add up very, very quickly. And so, depending on the type of food you go to, the frequency, could be $60 a month, could be higher. Groceries on average, maybe around $400. Again, that's going to depend on your diet. If you're vegetarian or if you eat meat, that'll heavily fluctuate the price. A basic utility bills per month. And so this would be, maybe electricity, heating, cooling, all of that. Might be around $140. But again, that's going to depend on how many people you're living with. So if it's on your own, that has a significant impact. But if you're in a house with lots of people and that's split, it's not going to be as large of a cost. Internet speeds can really vary. Cheapest probably around $50 per month, all the way up to maybe $150 per month. And phone bills, this is a big surprise for a lot of people. Phones in Canada are outrageously expensive. And the cheapest plan with very, very little data, you can maybe get away with $40 a month. If you need lots of data, it can really add up. So up to $100 per month, $200 per month. And again, where you're living in terms of the apartment rent is going to sort of vary. So what I would suggest that you do is, based on your savings or what you're budgeting, try to create a sort of a sense of how much you're going to allocate to your living expenses. So that would include these expenses plus rent. And you want to make sure that you're not maximizing out all of your savings and all of your money just towards this. You want to have a little bit of a buffer zone for some of those emergencies. Maybe your laptop breaks halfway through the semester. Maybe something has come up and you're required to, I don't know, if you're a business student, maybe you're required to buy a suit or something like that to do a presentation. So it's always good to have a little bit of a buffer emergency expense. When you're deciding on where to live, it's really going to depend on what you're looking for, what your lifestyle is. Do you want to walk to campus? Are you okay busing to campus? What is your budget? And so we've highlighted a few different neighborhoods, to be aware of, that are quite popular with students. So I would say the most popular areas are Westdale and Ainsleywood. This is sort of closest to campus. So McMaster's located, you can see sort of this blue dot in the center of the screen. That's campus. You know, probably regardless of where you are, you know, on this highlighted area, you can probably walk to campus or bus. The one nice thing about McMaster is that it is kind of a central bus hub. So there are lots of buses coming and going into campus. And so Westdale, Ainsleywood, there are some family homes, but especially on the Ainsleywood side, there are a lot of student homes as well as student apartments. Downtown Hamilton, you're going to be closer to, you know, maybe a bit more nightlife, a bit more restaurants, but it would be further away from campus. You would be looking to bus to campus. And then another area which is west of campus is a sort of an area called Dundas. It's a lot quieter. There are a lot more family homes. There are some apartments. Again, it would be too long to walk, but you would be able to bus into campus. And so, Wendy, did you want to talk a little bit about some of your suggestions when you're in terms of proximity to campus?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Andrew. So the location, how close to the campus? The location is very important. There are many houses that are 15 to 20 minutes walk from the campus. If you get a house too far away from the campus, it is very easy to be late to the class, less motivating to go to the class, or even end up not going to the class due to the weather or traffic. It gets very cold and there are lots of snow in the winter in Canada. Find a house close to the stores like grocery stores, restaurants, pharmacy, and dollar store. And it'll be ideal to find a house not too far away from the bus stop. Most students who attend McMaster University have free bus cards, and there are buses everywhere in Hamilton. A lot of students take the buses to the university.
Thanks, Wendy. And now we'll take a look at some resources to support your search. So some 3 priority resources that you may come in contact in, and what we suggest is looking at the classifieds/rental sites, Mac off campus, as well as Facebook to optimize your housing search. The first point that we want to note is finding housing is very competitive, as folks have already mentioned in the chat. So we do recommend that you start looking for houses as early as possible. The other point is that you may come across different forms of leases, one being an individual lease between yourself and the property owner or landlord, and also a group lease. So this is an agreement between a group as well as the landlord. This is especially to note from a financial perspective because you are held liable for a lease and what is written under those conditions in relation to rent. So even in the event that someone or a member of your group lease decides to leave for whatever reason, the group is then responsible for paying that monthly collective rent. So moving on to some resources. So Mac Off Campus is a site which hosts and connects landlords to prospective tenants. What will be especially beneficial for you all here is that it lists housing specifically or connects specifically to folks of the McMaster community. So this notes that you have to have a Mac ID in order to log onto this platform. So in that way, you're reassured that you'll at least be living with students, faculty, and staff belonging to the McMaster community. Although this is a site hosted on an affiliated McMaster website, it is important to note that the houses and the housing itself is private owned. So with that being said, McMaster's legal team is unable to intervene if disputes arise or if legal matters do arise between yourself and the landlord. However, we will speak to how you can possibly resolve some disputes or if you have any legal matters and who to direct those questions to. So how you operate Mac off campus is really quite user-friendly. So depending on what your values are, what your criteria is in terms of where you want to live, what type of place you want to live, what your budget is, you can actually maneuver these filters in order to optimize your search and be more specific and intentional about the housing places you'd like to connect with. So similar to the off-campus website, there are a couple of off-campus groups associated with McMaster, however, hosted on Facebook. So similar, these are opportunities to connect with landlords and even tenants directly who are looking for one more member of their collective lease or one more member of their home. So with that being said, it offers accommodations to prospective applicants, but this may be open to student housing, but also to folks or members of the Hamilton community. So keep in mind that you may be living with young professionals, as well as people belonging to the university's community. So similar to any Facebook group, you'll have folks posting related to any housing occupancies or availabilities through this page. So you can actually connect with the landlord or the tenants who are hosting that post directly via direct message and ask about a viewing or inquire about that space directly through Facebook. A new feature that Facebook offers is Marketplace. So it actually is an e-commerce space where it hosts different categories such as clothing, perhaps vehicles, food, and also inclusive of housing. So with that being said, you'll want to navigate this website with that same mindset that it's not associated or affiliated with the university, and therefore you may be living with folks in the larger Hamilton community. You'll have to navigate this, and Andrew, I think we might have to click the animation just to get it started, but you will navigate this just by selecting your area of interest, setting the kilometer radius in terms of how far in Hamilton you want to live, and also you can adjust the budget just so you're in line with what those financial values are for you. In addition, you can select the postings that come up and connect with landlords or perhaps property managers directly through that service. Last, we'll talk about classifieds and rental sites. So these are just a few that tend to be most popular: Kijiji, rentals.com, as well as rentseeker.ca. Again, to note that these are classified sites that host accommodations or housing, but again, they are not directly affiliated or associated with McMaster. And again, you may be living with folks who identify as students in other institutions within the area, or you may be living with young professionals, perhaps families. So this is a great way to optimize your search, but we do recommend just operating with a sense of caution, which we'll talk about a bit later. Next, we do recommend that students have an in-person viewing. We know that virtual viewings are common, and that request can come about, but the best way to see a space and understand that it meets your values as well as your living style is to see it in person. So with that being said, we recognize that folks may arrive at different times, but the best way to do a housing search is on foot, although there is some preliminary research that you can do before you arrive in Canada. How we suggest is perhaps renting a temporary space, whether that's through an Airbnb, a hostel, or a hotel, in order to have that in-person experience, especially when you're signing a legal document such as a lease. And now I'll pass it on to Andrew to talk about how we should operate within caution when looking at hosting sites.
Great, thanks, Andrea. So we obviously understand that, searching for housing when you're not in the country is extremely difficult. And we don't want to scare you when we're talking about scams and frauds, but we do need to talk about it because unfortunately there are individuals that, do scam, not just international students, but Canadians as well. And so a few things just to be aware of would be if you're seeing a posting and the presentation online is really poor, maybe there are spelling mistakes, maybe the pictures are taken from another source, or the pictures look really dated and old. It's just to be mindful that it potentially could be a scam. We're not saying it definitely is, but these are just things to be cautious of. Other worrisome pieces would be about inflated costs. So, if there are high upfront costs saying, you need to pay us like a $5,000 deposit upfront before you sign anything. If they're requesting payment in cash only, if the payments or the price is, too good to be true. So if the pictures are this beautiful, modern one-bedroom apartment, but it's only $500 a month, if it's too good to be true, it's probably because it's not true. And also if they're asking you to, specifically, wire you like wire or request lots of money upfront. It is common for landlords to be asking maybe for a deposit, which is typically your first or last month's rent. But again, you should never be sending anyone money until you have been able to view the apartment, you've viewed and signed the lease. And again, when we say view the apartment, a possibility would be, I can't physically be here, but can we arrange a Zoom walkthrough where they're, on camera walking you through, pointing out everything, just to verify that, the person who is posting the listing is the person that owns that property. Also, just generally, lack of transparency. If they are not willing for you to view the property, if they're not willing to answer any of your specific questions, if they're just very kind of standoffish and not willing to go into details, that could be a sign that it's not a legitimate posting. And lastly, we really just want you to trust your instincts, use your intuition. If you have any hesitation about something, it's better to, I think, be on the side of caution and not end up falling victim to a scam. So once you have found a place and it's a legitimate place, you've signed the lease, everything's good, and you're ready to move in, we would recommend that you do a few sort of safety checks or walkthroughs. So the first thing would be, you want to meet with your landlord to receive your keys and do a walkthrough of the property. And the reason this is suggested is, in a rental that there could be damage from a previous tenant, maybe some scratches, maybe an appliance isn't working properly. And so you'd want to make note of that before you move in or as soon as you move in. So when you move out, the landlord doesn't say, hey, there was this damage to this wall, you caused it, you have to pay. So again, it's very common to just ask the landlord, let's just do a walkthrough. And then, for you to make note, take any pictures of anything that is damaged so you're not responsible for that. If you're living in a student house, you are probably going to be responsible for putting out garbage and recycling. You might be responsible for some yard maintenance, such as shoveling the snow. So you want to have that discussion with your landlord just to see, what your responsibilities are and what the landlord is going to cover. A lot of this should be written in the lease, but if it's not, especially things like when do you put out your garbage, where do you find your mail, those kind of things would be, best to have that conversation. And then for most places, you are going to have to buy your own bedding. There are places in Hamilton that you could have. You could even, potentially try to arrange for delivery of some bedding, so you have it once you arrive and move in. Once you're in, just general safety. I always recommend you to keep your doors and windows locked. Never let anybody into your house that you do not know. Even if somebody shows up and says, hi, I'm here to check on your furnace, or I'm here to check on your hot water heater. Unless your landlord has let you know somebody's coming in to do work, don't let anybody in. You also want to double check to make sure that your house has working smoke alarms and carbon monoxide detectors. Some of the houses might be a little bit older. And so, you want to make sure that you're following proper safety. You don't want to be plugging in, a TV, a laptop, a microwave, a hair dryer, your phone charger, a mini fridge, all of these things into one outlet because it might overload. Also, if you've never cooked before, recognizing that moving away from home, you're going to have lots of new experiences. Never leave your stove unattended. Always stay with what you're cooking. Set timers to remind you to check on things in the oven, that kind of stuff. And then you also just want to be aware of, bed bugs or any pests or other critters. Again, we're not telling you this to scare you. We're telling you this just of things to be aware of when you're looking through properties. We also recognize that, right now it is still a pandemic, and if you're living with others, you just want to have ensure that there is good communication channels about how you're feeling, how other people are feeling. Practice good hygiene, proper hand washing, cleaning shared spaces frequently. We recognize that Ontario's guidelines in terms of quarantining might be different from, where you are coming from. So we would recommend that you get familiar with what those guidelines are. Chances are they might change because they're changing all the time. So I don't want to go into what they are now, because by the time you arrive, maybe in August and September, they might be slightly different. But again, just be aware of what those regulations are. Monitor your symptoms. And of course, I think generally, McMaster and in Ontario, we do encourage people, if you do have symptoms and if you are feeling well, to stay home so you're not spreading. A couple of resources for you that we wanted to share. Hopefully you never have to use these, but it is good to be aware. If there are any kind of housing disputes, so this could be between tenants, or this could be maybe as a tenant between you and your landlord. You are not alone through this journey. There are lots of resources. There are lots of free resources that can help you navigate this, so you know what your rights are. Even if you're new to Canada, even if you think I'm an international student, your rights are the same because you are a tenant, right? And so there are lots of rights that protect you as a tenant. So the Hamilton Legal Clinic is a great resource. They offer free legal advice, not just on housing, but other legal advice. You could always approach your landlord or property manager, especially if there's disputes between your roommates. And there's also a lot of really great resources through the Ontario government. And of course, you can always reach out to us if you do have any questions or concerns. So in terms of next steps, what we recommend that you do is, finalize your budget, figure out what it is that you can afford, identify your housing needs. Do I want to live alone? Do I want to live with other people? Where do I want to live? And then start your search. And again, we say with due diligence, most postings are legit. Most postings are real. Most landlords are great and fair people. But unfortunately, there are these scams and frauds that do exist. Once you've finalized your housing choice, review your lease, make sure everything is in order, and then make those appropriate arrangements for you to move in, meet your landlord, get your keys, do your walkthrough, and then you're settled.